While I was living and studying in the capital of my country, I had a small rented basement of a house built in 1917 next to a nightclub. I was preparing to go to sleep quite early since I had class at 8 a.m. the next day. Right before I fell asleep, I remembered that I forgot to lock the door. But since the city I lived in was generally quite safe, and the only way to get to the entrance of my place was past the front gate, all around to the other side of the house and down some stairs, I didn't think much of it and proceeded to fall asleep. Skip forward to the middle of the night. I wake up and feel something or someone slowly pulling my blanket off of me. In a confused state, I extend my hand and feel a hairy, male arm under my fingers. My first thought was, oh, this is probably my drunk flatmate, but then I remembered that he was at his girlfriend's place on the other side of town. In pitch black, I jump out of my bed, rush to the light switch, and as I turn it on, I find a stranger around my age, standing in his underwear by my bed, with his underwear clearly wet from piss. My initial reaction was to stay calm since I had no idea if this dude was violent, or what was even going on in the first place. I calmly asked him, "Man, what the fuck are you doing here?" He was clearly very confused as well, and sat on the recliner I had in my tiny room. And there we were, both in our underwear, him covered in piss, and I on the border of pissing myself. And what does he do? He extends his hand and introduces himself to me. At this point, I go, "Okay, dude, get out of my house," and start escorting him to the hallway, where I find his clothes and shoes on the floor. As I'm escorting him out, he goes into the bathroom and locks himself inside. I hear him turn on the shower, and I proceed to knock on the door saying, "Hey man, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." To which he replies, "I'm not afraid of the police." Well, that's just perfect, isn't it? A few minutes pass and he steps out of the bathroom butt naked, with my flatmate's towel around his waist. Looks at me kind of content and says, "Hey, did you see? They've got a shower in there." At this point, I am fuming. "Who's got a shower, asshole? This is my house. You're a total stranger and you broke into my place." Suddenly, an expression of complete fear appears on his face. "Oh my God, what have I done? Jesus Christ," he starts exclaiming, as he's very awkwardly trying to get dressed in the hallway. Then I managed to get him out of my house. I even called one of my friends from my phone to pick him up at the club. Turns out, he's from a completely other town and came to party at the capital. Got kicked out of the club for starting a fight and somehow managed to get into my place. To this day, I have no idea what he was on, how the hell he managed to find my apartment, as it's quite hidden from the street. Anyway, I apologize for a long post. I'm not even sure if this is the right place to post it, but I found it extremely creepy. Let's just say I'll never forget to lock my door from that day on. I didn't sleep well for weeks after. Oh, I should add that I actually found the dude on Facebook a while later. Turns out, we have a mutual friend. I'm a female. I was 13 at the time, but looked more like a 10-year-old. My grandma lives 2 states away and discovered she had stage 4 cancer. My mom picked my sisters and I up and drove us there, while my dad stayed at home for work. We were there for 3 months. My aunts and uncle lived in the same city as my grandma, and me and my sister would frequently spend the night at one of my aunt's houses. One day, I was making lunch for my grandma when my uncle walked into the kitchen. He suddenly shouted and rushed out the back door. I caught a glimpse of a man in a red baseball hat running from the kitchen window. He had been watching me. My uncle claimed that he didn't catch him. We found 2 piles of cigarette butts in the backyard, one by the kitchen window and one by the bathroom window. Yeah, my grandma didn't have blinds or curtains on any of the windows besides her bedroom window. Needless to say, I was horrified. Fast forward a few days, and my mom was certain who the Peeping Tom was. my grandma's neighbor, who always wore a red baseball hat and had suddenly became smoking buddies with my uncle. We couldn't prove anything because my uncle backed him up, and we didn't want my grandma to be distressed, so we let it go. A couple days later, I was spending the night at one of my aunt's houses while my sister was at the other aunt's house. It was just my cousin and I there, while my aunt was at the store. I heard a car door and peeked out the window to see if it was my aunt, but I saw a man standing at the end of the empty driveway. He wore a red baseball hat pulled over his eyes. My uncle had told him where I was. I freaked. I locked the doors and told my cousin to call her mom. She was on her way home, but the man was already gone. After that, I never left my mom's side. I stayed every night at my grandma's house. My dad flew up soon after, and that was the end of the incidents with my grandma's neighbor. There was now a man in the house, and if my dad left to go to the store or something, he took me with him. It's been 14 years, and many disturbing things have come to light. My uncle was a predator, and one of my sisters was one of his victims. My aunt knew and covered it up for him. The sister of mine, she's running the streets, using hard drugs to self-medicate, and her son was taken away from her. My parents are absolutely devastated, and the guilt eats away at my mom every day. So for some context, I'm a 26-year-old female, and I also currently live with a female roommate who hasn't been here a lot due to the fact that she's been staying with her boyfriend. We've only been living here for about 6 months, so a pretty good while, but not years. I feel safe in this house, but it all changed a few nights ago when I was there alone. The doors were locked, thank God, but I was in the kitchen, and in the kitchen there's a window above our sink that looks into the back of our property, and there's just straight up woods in the back of our house. So we never bothered on getting a curtain for our kitchen window because nothing was back there. It just hasn't seemed like a priority. So I'm in the kitchen making ramen on the stove, which was right next to the sink, and I hear something outside the window. I look out there, and there's a man standing there looking at me. Obviously, he ran away, but I didn't know if he was trying to get in or what. I called the police, then my father. The police were nice, but because he was gone by the time they arrived, they couldn't do much. I have cameras for the sides and front of my house, and they told me to get one in the back, and if he comes back to call them and they'll handle it. I'm not staying here anymore. I ordered a ring from Amazon, set it up, and I've been watching it while staying at my family's for a week. I don't know when I'll feel safe enough to return. I'm really scared. Hey everyone, I don't post much on Reddit, but I need to get out what just happened a few hours ago. This seemed like a place to put it. For some background first, I'm a 29-year-old woman. I live in an apartment in a sketchier side of my town, so I'm not unaccustomed to strange people pulling up and strange things happening. I've been through a home break-in, so I'm very hyper-vigilant when it comes to keeping myself and my home safe. I also smoke cigarettes. Nasty habit, I know. But having cats and not wanting my house to reek like smoke, I walk out to my balcony to smoke. That's exactly what I was doing when this happened. I was sitting on my balcony, smoking, and just enjoying the night, when I noticed a car I've never seen before pull into the back parking lot of my apartments right by my balcony. I initially felt a bit off, but I didn't want to come off as being a paranoid neighbor, so I keep sitting and smoking my cigarette. Then I hear footsteps making a beeline through my backyard. There's a large, burly man that I've never seen before, walking briskly through my backyard. Again, I still don't try to make much of it, because they might be there for my neighbor. My anxiety was definitely on alert, but not in panic mode, until I realized that he was going straight to the portion of my backyard. Then he does something that's still freaking me out as I type this. He stops right in my backyard and looks up at me on the balcony, not saying a word. Now I'm in absolute panic mode. I audibly say, "Oh fuck no." Spring up, slam and lock the balcony door, run to my upstairs bathroom, and dial 911. I listen to every sound downstairs while I'm panicking in the bathroom, and it truly sounded like someone was messing with my back door. I don't know for sure, but I was hyper vigilant. I don't know if he was in my backyard for a few minutes because I was in my bathroom for several minutes until I decided to peek out the balcony window. I saw him walking to his car and getting in. That also tells me that I don't think he was here to rob me, but something more sinister. Luckily, he was lazy because, again, I live on a cheaper side of town, so I can imagine the quality of my doors and locks. I'm really hoping that it was just some guy who was drunk or high and had the wrong house, but my gut is telling me otherwise. When I was a senior in college a few years ago, I lived in an old house about a 5-minute walk from campus with 5 girlfriends. It was still COVID times, so we spent a lot of time in the house since we really couldn't go elsewhere. To preface, this house was old, and many of the windows didn't lock. Our landlord sucked, as many college ones do, and did nothing to fix this issue. But with it being 6 of us, and often a boyfriend or 2 sleeping in the house, it felt mostly safe, and most of us kept our windows open. Our college town is in a town just outside the second most dangerous city in the state, but right around the campus is relatively safe. When the weather started getting warmer in early spring, we would sit out on the roof to sunbathe, and this roof faced the street. We would access the roof from my roommate's, let's call her Mary, bedroom window on the second floor, since it led straight to the roof. Our street was residential and didn't get much traffic, but we did have a couple encounters of younger guys catcalling us as they drove by, but nothing seemed sinister as we were college kids. One night, late in the semester, Mary went up to her room to call her brother while the rest of us were hanging out downstairs. That's when she rushed downstairs and said that she saw a ladder leading up to the roof where we would all sunbathe right near her window, which was open. Later, we learned she said out loud to her brother what she saw before she came down. When she told us, many other roommates and her boyfriend ran outside to find the man running away from the house with a freaking ladder, who we assumed heard Mary tell her brother she saw a ladder and knew he was caught. It was dark, so they couldn't make out anything about him. I immediately texted our landlord, asking if he had came by to the house to do any work, and he said no. We called the police who came by. They did some investigating and patrolled around our house a couple nights, but we never found out who the man was, what his intentions were, or if he had done it before. So did the creep with the ladder. Let's not meet. My mother worked long shifts at the airport 7 days a week, so me, 12, female, and my younger sister, 10, were at home by ourselves a majority of the time. For reference, we lived in a house that had gates on the windows and a gated door that you had to unlock to get to the actual front door. It was late at night, around 10 p.m., and me and my sister were watching TV and preparing for bed. I noticed some sounds coming from the front door and realized it was someone banging on the gate. I was naive back then and decided to open the door to see who it was. It was a young white man in his late 20s. He had on a black and white striped shirt with a jean jacket. I asked him what he needed, and he sat there with a blank face and calmly said that he needed me to let him in. I asked him why, and he repeated himself and said, "Let me in, I'm in trouble." He kept looking over his shoulder, and I felt a bit unnerved and decided not to unlock the gate for him. As soon as I made the decision not to let him in, the police showed up and pulled out their guns. They gave him directions to walk backwards with his hands up, and at the moment, I decided now was a good time to close the door. I quickly realized that he may have been running from the police for a crime he committed. Till this day, I wonder what would have happened if I opened the door and let him in. Creepy. So about 4 years ago, I was living with an ex-boyfriend. We'll call him Useless Prick, and his aunt, Pill Popper Pam, and her boyfriend, Loser Len. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I had to pee. Useless Prick was asleep in the bed when I got up. I walked across the house, and Pill Popping Pam's door was open. She and Loser Len were both passed out. I made my way sleepily to the bathroom and saw the light was on. Since I knew everyone was asleep, I assumed one of them left the light on and opened the door. I was wrong. I saw multiple things in a few seconds. The first thing I remember is that it smelled like horrible shit and that someone had just taken a shower based on the steam. Secondly, there were clothes folded up into squares, organized on the ground. There was a man on the toilet. I, having manners and very much still half asleep, jumped and apologized and closed the door. I panicked and went to my room and tried to wake up Useless Prick, but he was, of course, useless. I texted Pill Popper Pam and said, "Hey, there's a man in our bathroom." She texted back, "I know, it's okay. He's a friend of mine." This calmed me down, and I messaged back something like, "Okay, thanks, just checking." And she said, "No problem, go back to sleep," and I did. The next day, I bring it up when everyone is around. Pill Popper Pam said she never texted me. She was high on pills and passed out cold, and she would never allow a friend to come in like that. And it sounded like a homeless man who walked the street constantly. He had used her phone. I will add that her phone was plugged in and sitting on the ground about 2 feet away from the bedroom door, next to their bed. When we talk about if he could have texted from it, she said that she didn't have a passcode on her phone. Years ago, when I was 11, I was staying home alone with my little brother who was 7. At the time, it was about 9 p.m., dark, and pouring rain. We were reading in our room, right next to the front door, with a big window and open blinds. That's when I hear the front doorbell ring, followed by knocking. I thought my parents had arrived. Strange though that they didn't use the garage or their keys. I looked outside to see if their car was there. Nothing but rain. As I approached the door, I hear a man's voice that was not my father's yell. "Would you like some cookies? We're selling Girl Scout cookies." I'm shocked at this, considering the weather and time of day. Saying nothing, I check the peephole and peer through the side window, only to see that it's not a father with a girl, as I expected. My heart dropped. Standing there was just a fully grown man in his late 50s, no box of cookies in sight, soaking on my doorstep. I can remember the gut-wrenching feeling of having to check the locks while he was right on the other side. For sure, he heard us. The 2 locks were the only thing separating myself and brother from a potential monster. He continued to knock and mention his cookies, as I considered calling the cops. That's when I remembered the blinds were open in my room where my brother was, with the light on. As I turned the corner into the doorway, I could see the man carefully peering into the window, possibly eyeing my brother, who was distracted by a book. My heart was pounding now as I began to panic. In a move that took all my willpower, I quickly turned off the lights and ran to the window to close the blinds, in full view of the man, as fast as I could. I double-checked all the locks in the house, closed all the blinds, and told my brother to hang out in one of the biggest closets in the interior of the house. I didn't tell him what was going on, so he wouldn't be frightened, and for some reason, I never did call the cops or my parents. I just waited in the hallway until he left. Thinking about this still gives me shivers that so many things could have gone wrong that night. My worst fear sense is a stranger getting to the unlocked door before I do. My mom had left me and my brother home alone. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13, so I would have been around 9 years old. I was watching him play Xbox in our living room. He had his headset on, talking to his friends. Then there was a knock on our front door in our carport. I run and answer the door without looking. It's a grown man I'd never seen before. We are only separated by the screen door, which is unlocked all the time. He asked, "Are your parents home?" Horror washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from a carport, which is strange in itself. A stranger would knock on the front door, and our carport is empty. We only had one car, and my mom had taken it. This man knows that my parents aren't home. I'm afraid, I don't know why, but I'm scared. Immediately, my brother in the other room comes to mind. I never had a father figure. My brother has always been the one who makes me feel safe. The strongest person in the whole world. Someone who can protect me in any situation. How most people regard their father, I think. I feel as though I could barely speak. Wide-eyed, I manage to stutter out, "No, but my big brother's here." Without even a moment's pause, the man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it. Like an act of God, divine intervention, an arm reaches out from behind me, over my shoulder, and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence out the carport, and he closes the door behind him. The man tells my brother he's looking to buy the shitty swing set that was in our front yard at the time. My brother comes back in without saying anything to me, puts on his headset, and continues playing. I sit down as well and continue watching him. I don't believe we ever told our mom. Luckily, we never encountered that person again, and it pretty much fades away in my memory. But as I got older, it became one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Creepy, not so much of what happened, but what could have. Unnerving how absolutely oblivious we were. I like to think the man was planning to lock me in the room, rob the place, and leave. But people can be so evil. This occurred to my wife and I right before I left the Marines. After leaving the military, I was obsessed with jogging, hiking. I liked pushing myself to see how much weight I could carry and how far I could run and hike. Every Sunday morning at 5 a.m., my wife would drive me 8 miles from our apartment. I would road march with a heavy pack through town back home. This particular Sunday was very warm. She dropped me off at the location. We said our goodbyes, and she returned to the apartment. It's not terribly dangerous where we live, but having done some combat deployments, I was always aware of my surroundings. Therefore, I was carrying my handgun that was typically located in our bedroom. When my wife returned to the apartment, she noticed that there was a little white Honda parked near the front of our unit, which was not there before. She thought it was odd because it was so early on a Sunday morning. She thought about not getting out of her car because she was a little creeped out. She decided to go in, but walked quickly. She got back into bed and tried to get some sleep while I hiked home. Our apartment was a ground level unit, and there was a large bush located in front of our window with gravel surrounding it. As she laid in bed, she heard some slight shifting of gravel. She lay there silently listening. Then she heard heavy breathing, which she said sounded like it was someone with her lips right on our window. Due to the heat, our window was open, but there was still a screen and large drapes. My wife lay there silently for several minutes while the breathing continued. I don't know what came over her, but she got ballsy. She jumped up out of bed and threw the drapes open. she saw a grown man standing there, who immediately turned around the corner of the wall out of view. She didn't say anything to this man, but she could see his shadow from the light above the door to the unit next to ours. The man stood there, still breathing heavily. She described it as almost intentionally loud. In a flash, the man took off in a dead sprint for the white Honda. My wife said she had no idea what to do because she was so terrified that he would return. She knew I had the gun, so she grabbed the K-bar, a large military-style fixed-blade knife that I kept underneath the mattress. She waited for about 5 minutes before running out of the house and getting into her car. She drove the route I had told her I would be taking and found me. I remember it so clearly because my wife's car pulled up and she was bawling and had the large knife in her hands. She explained everything. She drove me home. I called the police on the way. We arrived and the white Honda was gone. The police reported that they had received reports of suspicious activity happening recently in the early mornings. He was never caught to my knowledge. It creeps me out to this day that someone is still out there, probably getting brazen every time he gets away with something. So this happened to our neighborhood when I was about 10. We lived in a super nice subdivision on a ridge near a marina. The houses were not right on top of each other due to how the land was, and our house was one of those ones that was not right next to the other houses. Our house backed up to a lot of woods that I used to play in. Our neighborhood was plagued one year by a peeping Tom. My mom had talked to some of the neighbors, and several people had noticed a guy creeping about in backyards or looking through windows. One neighbor said that her and her husband had another couple over for dinner, and when the ladies went out to the backyard, down to the woodpile to get more firewood, they noticed a man standing just outside the woods, staring at them. They ran to get their husbands, but he was gone at that point. So we were all on the lookout. One night, I was in bed, and my bed was opposite to the window in the room. Our house was mostly on ground level, but my bedroom window was higher up from the ground. However, there was a little ledge under the window. I used to use that ledge to climb in and out of my window for fun. I even put a slide under the window once and slid out of my window. So one night, I'm in bed and I wake up for some reason. I look out the window and the floodlights were on in the backyard. I clearly see an outline of a man's shoulder and head in the window, like he was standing on the ledge, just looking in. I scream and get my parents, and of course, by the time we get back, he's gone. My mom tended to believe me, but my dad said I just dreamt it. I made my dad search the entire huge house before I would go back to sleep. The reports came in from the neighbors that the boats down the marina were getting broken into. My guess is the Peeping Tom was breaking into the boats for food, or just sleep. Well, it all came to a head one night, and we were the family that got the worst of it. Our house was like one level, and had a basement, where the master bedroom had these huge windows that went all the way to the ground. They could be opened, and just have a screen. You just turn a handle and they open out. My parents were lax in security, and would leave the dang windows open while they slept, if the weather was nice. So my dad was gone at night, which was not abnormal for him. He was gone at night a lot, which perhaps the Peeping Tom knew if he had been watching us. My mom was asleep in her bed, which was right next to one of the big fold-out windows, which were open. She likes to sleep with the TV on. She said she kept hearing leaves crunching, and she thought it must have been something on the TV. Then she finally realized that sound was coming from outside the window, literally 1.5 feet away. She jumped out of bed and ran to turn on the floodlights, and there in front of the window was the outline of a man. Literally, all that the guy had to do was kick the screen in and step down into the house. It was that simple. We had an alarm system, so my mom runs to hit the panic button and the alarm goes off. She said the guy bolted. I was asleep in my bed while it was going on and wake up to hear the alarm and the cops arriving shortly after. The cops were too lazy to go into the woods to look for him, and he had ran into the woods behind our house. They did take an unmarked car and drive it around to the other side of the woods to see if they could catch him when he came out the other side, but of course they never found him. But maybe almost getting caught was enough for him to stop, because after that night the Peeping Tom was never seen again in our neighborhood. I suppose he moved on, but not before he literally scared the living daylights out of my mother and me. The lesson of this incident has taught me to never sleep with my windows open, ever.